Hi, today we're going to take a look at a complicated subject, and that's going to be mob spawning. Prior to this, we've drug prefabs into the scene and statically placed them. Now we're going to have mobs that these models and the characters behind them will be spawned into the world by this spawning system. And to give us a little tour of the finished product here, at least what I expect we'll do today, we have our chat window, which has been brought in. It's really a command interpreter behind it. If you recall, I can ask for locations and stuff like that. I can move around and get a different location. But I've added a new command to it today. And what it's going to be able to do is to respawn this group. So we see 3 orcs now, and we also see a new type of orc here, elemental orc. So that's going to be something that's new, because they're not all orcs, or at least not the basic orcs. And I say respawn, and we see that they all go away and they come back in the different positions. Still in the same area, but not quite the same spot. And if I continue to do this, we won't always get, see, an elemental orc is not exactly, it's about a 15% chance of getting one of those. And it seems to respawn. Respawn. I'm trying to get a boss to spawn here. He's rare. This is the whole point behind him. Hope I don't have to restart this video because this is going to take forever. Bear with me for just a moment. You can fast forward if this is getting too annoying. But I am going to get that boss to spawn. See, already has RPG elements to it. There we go. Here's the boss. See, he's a rare spawn. Occurs about 5% of the time. We also see that he is larger than the other ones. You can't really see it too much, but he's a little bit larger than the others. He's scaled up. They have different names, and they appear in different locations. All right, so that's what we have right now. There's an awful lot that goes into this. So let's take a look at this here. Recall that the idea of a mob here, I want to make sure I keep reinforcing this definition because it's a jargon term. A mob is a computer-controlled character. So the name came from mobile, and because most computer-controlled characters were mobile. They moved around in the world as opposed to non-living things like this lean-to right here. You know, that's not going to go anywhere, so it's not a mobile object. And these bosses, I mean, these orcs, they are standing there, not doing anything, but they certainly can move around. I think if I got close enough to them, they might. I'm not sure if they have that. Okay. They don't have the chase behavior turned on right now. But we could get them to aggro and they'd chase me all around the map and then they'd go back to wherever they were. Okay, so what we're going to work on today is a variation of the EverQuest spawn system. And it's quite versatile. It's a little bit more complex than other solutions, but I think the benefits are worth it, and it gives us a case study on how a AAA game did its mob spawning. This kept everybody interested for a very long time. So along the way, we're going to be discussing the different types of data that we need to create and gather during the development or level building process, and how best to represent it. And then we'll discuss a few ideas I considered, but in the end rejected. Now this is all part of the development process, and I hope you find it useful to observe. Okay, so this is a data management challenge, to say the least. We have a lot of information here. Now we could use a database, and for a bit I toyed with the idea of bringing in SQLite to handle the data management. But that would be a sledgehammer solution. Okay, we really don't need that. But games like EverQuest do store the bulk of their server-side data in a database. And being able to make queries is really nice, but you know, that's a bit much more here than we need here. We could go and configure it, get it set up, but we'd spend so much time doing it that I think we would have the expense of other more important things here. So let's make a quick and dirty, sufficiently good implementation here. Perfectly fine, nothing wrong with it, but we won't have the full database behind it. Now I considered scriptable objects, which are a Unity feature. Basically, these are prefabs for data. One edits the data in the inspector, and I think that they're practical for bulk data. It's okay for certain things, but not for what I want to do. The alternative to having a big bulk block is to create separate scriptable objects for each record of data, which feels excessive. So I'm rejecting the scriptable objects. I'll find a better use for them later. Right now, what we're going to do is we want to find what's most convenient for data entry and what's the easiest to use. And it turns out that we have two different types of data going on here, and there's no one answer for both of them. We have to use a couple of different things. For one thing, the areas where these orcs spawn and enter the world, that's best done, entered into the system through the scene editor. Okay, being able to graphically just position things. Say, this is where I want my spawn point. This is where I want the creatures to have a chance to occur. But information on the NPCs themselves, on the mobs, to say what type it is, what its name is, all of that data is, I'd really rather do that in an editor. I'd really rather do that in mono develop. Or if you guys are so inclined, Visual Studio. Okay, being able to have a full screen of text there, to search for things, to move lines around, that's quicker for that type of data. So we're talking about the static data that doesn't change, as opposed to dynamic data, like where this thing is in the world as it moves around, and its health, and all these other attributes. Any type of customization that we do to a creature would be something that we would not statically assign ahead of time. So let's take a moment and let me discuss my goals for this video. I want a system that manages spawning and respawning of mobs. That means the system must decide when to spawn a mob. That means when to bring a new creature into the world, what to spawn, what type it is, a boss orc versus a regular orc, for example. We need to know where exactly to spawn each of the mobs. Where are the valid places? I wouldn't want a mob to spawn, on top of the this lean-to or inside of a tree or something like that. The idea behind this, what we're seeing here, is this is a camp. This is an area that we can expect to find orcs. And if we kill an orc, it should reappear at some point later on down the line, some respawn time. It wouldn't be instant, but we would expect that maybe 5-10 minutes after we kill it, that it would appear again. One wants to pick that respawn time so that you have enough to kill off all these other creatures, recover from the battle before they start respawning. Otherwise, they'll never be able to get through certain areas of the scene. So, so that's what decisions we need to make here in our spawning system. What to spawn, where to spawn it, when to spawn it. Now, spawning is the process, as I mentioned, of allowing a mob to enter the world. And it's a combination of the physical model that we have, as well as the data structures behind the scene. Now, we've already worked on creating the physical models and bringing them in as prefabs. And you can see them standing here, running their idle animations. Okay? But that's just an appearance. What's behind the scenes is going to be, now we did also add in some AI to them, but that's a little bit behind the scene. But the information on what their attributes are, what their current health is, that type of stuff must also be created when we instantiate a new creature. When we spawn something in there, it has to be recorded by the different management classes, and so that we can get rid of it later on or respawn it. We know which spawn group to spawn it in. And I'm using lots of jargon here, but I promise it'll be clear as we go along. But I just wanted to really talk about what spawning was, that it was not just the physical model, but also data structures. Now, I have a prefab for the orc, which is used in the scene. And we're going to build data behind it today. The attributes, the skills, the inventory are things to consider. We haven't discussed this for real yet, and I'm just going to create some placeholder data. I'm not going to be using it in this video. But it gives you an idea of where we would put that later on. Once we decide what the rules of the game are, when a combat system is created, we have to decide how it's going to work, what different values we're going to manipulate. So that's going to be for later on. But right now, we just need to be able to have a place to store the data. Now, I can attach the data to a script, and I can put the data in a script and attach it to the prefab. And it seems kind of reasonable. But what happens if a player leaves the scene? And I should also mention here that I'm going to refer to the scenes as zones, because that's the terminology that I'm comfortable with. But it still means an area of the world, a discrete area of the world. And that these would load and unload as you move around the world, very much like a Unity scene. So what happens when the player leaves the scene? Well, all these game objects are going to go away. Now, we could mark them to say, please leave these alone, don't remove them when the scene unloads, but that seems a very inefficient way of doing things. I mean, I don't know how many of these mobs we're going to have on the map, and I don't feel like keeping a whole bunch of mobs around that we're not using right now. I would like to keep some data around on them. So the difference between the static stuff that doesn't change, like the name, and the dynamic stuff that does change. And so there's a separation here of stuff that's managed by Unity and stuff that's not managed by Unity. So we're going to be creating data of both types, but the important thing is we're going to be creating data that's no longer managed by Unity, and so it will persist across scene changes. And while I'm thinking about it, I should probably take a minute to mention that games like Skyrim manage huge outdoor scenes, and they do so without creating zones in the outdoors. Yeah, there will be scene changes when we go inside, but those are, those I can understand, but the huge outdoor map is seamless as you move around in that. We're not going to do that. That's a pretty advanced topic. They did an incredible job with Skyrim and the whole Elder Scrolls series of giving us that seamless view of the world. And I don't know that it's really worth it. Certainly not right now. It's okay to chop the world up into discrete chunks. EverQuest has done it for years. No one's really complained about it. We set up little choke points between the zones, like a tunnel or a narrow pass, and you walk into it, and the scene unloads and the new one loads. And that's fine. But it does bring up the question, of what happens if we move out of an area, if we move into a different zone and then move back into our original zone. We kind of want things to be about the same. Okay, we don't want everything to reset back to the original. I mean, that would be certainly a way to exploit the mechanics of the game, because you could keep going back and forth until your rare mob spawns, and that's not how things are supposed to work. But we're not going to go into how to build a big seamless world, because that would be a very big topic. But I will mention that it is possible, if we were to be careful, to take creatures and entities that are farther away, that are not in our immediate area, and suspend them, and then enable them once we got closer. We could remove them, release their memory, and then bring them back into the scene as we start to get closer. So for a huge outdoor world, okay, let's say we're in an area that's 20 or 30 square miles across. We don't have to have any of those faraway creatures loaded, certainly not running in the scene. And as we got closer and closer, we might set what our boundary is. But we might say, we'll get within about a half mile of the creature, go ahead and spawn it, bring it into the world. That way, when we got closer, it would be there. So that's how we could do a seamless world. But I'm going to forego that for the demonstrations here, because we can get a lot done without that complexity, and I don't think it buys us a lot for this course. And I realize we're standing here staring at these orcs here while I talk, but I want to lay some background on it before we start implementing code, before we start changing things. I want to introduce a few of the data structures, and then I'll show you a chart that kind of maps everything out. I'm going to want to create a zone manager object that's going to watch over the zone. This is going to be something that will not persist across scene changes. It will just be something that manages this zone while it's up and running. Okay, that's going to be the only mono behavior that I'm going to introduce today. There will be one per zone, and if the scene's unloaded, it goes away. So nothing that we need to persist will be kept there. It's just to hold on to stuff that we have right now. Okay, the objects is handy because as a mono behavior, it can interact with Unity in ways that other classes cannot. The zone manager can perform tasks that are reserved for mono behaviors, such as the timer management, coroutines, those types of things we could do if we need to in the zone manager. But the objects that I'm going to create that are not mono behaviors won't be able to do that. So we're separating the responsibilities right there. Zone Manager will be the primary interface to Unity. Now, I think we're going to discuss timers in the next video. I expect this video is going to be long enough, and it certainly took long enough to prepare for this video to figure out what's a good way of doing things. And I'll say up front, this is not necessarily the best way of doing things. There's just one way of doing things. But I wanted to find something that was functional, it made sense, and it wasn't too awful. And I'm pretty okay with it right now. I'm pretty happy with what I see. Okay, back on the topic, what happens when the player leaves the zone? I'm thinking about really what happens when the player re-enters the zone. Are things going to be put back the way they were, or reasonably close? Now, when we leave the zone, the scene's going to unload, and all the data with all the game objects are going to go away, unless we mark them so that they don't unload with the scene. But I don't see any reason to do that right now. I don't want to keep an entire scene stuck around in cold storage. Okay, for the games that we're working on here in this semester, it would probably be okay. I doubt our scenes are going to be that big, but still, it's just a bad habit to get into. I want to pretend, at least, that we have several hundred zones out there, and if they're huge, and we need to kind of marshal our assets and use them. Just because we might have a couple of gigabytes of memory, let's not assume that. Okay. Now, we could reset the zones to a default state when they come back in, and then reload it each time the player enters. Now, I'm not happy about that. As I mentioned, we want to keep things like they were, because if you go to the trouble of clearing out an area of the zone so it's safe to get through it, and you accidentally zone out or you intentionally zone out for something, if you come back in, you want the mobs to still be down unless their respawn timers have gone through. We'll talk about the timers later, but the idea is that if I kill that mob, if I kill this boss here, no mob should respawn where he's at for some period of time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And so if you run out of the zone for a quick jaunt and you come back in, those timers should still be running. So we need to organize our data and prepare for that. Okay, so I'm prepared to invest a lot of effort to make that happen. I hope it's worth it, but if it's not, it's just a bad decision on my part. We have to make the best decisions we can to try to predict what's going to be helpful. And not all the time we're going to get it right. But I still think it's a good idea to try to keep this so that we can zone back and forth and have it look right. Okay, that means that static data that can be stored in the scene in scripts, because it will be reloaded when the scene gets recreated. But dynamic data, the changing state of the world, needs to be stored outside of the scene. And so we're going to be creating some data structures that are not managed by Unity, as I mentioned, and those will persist between scene changes. Okay. We're going to be creating classes that do not inherit from mono behavior or game object. And as long as we keep a reference to them, they'll stick around. So we need to keep those references, and so we're going to create manager classes. And I'm going to implement a singleton for one of our manager classes. This means there will be one and only one of them, and we can access it through its namespace. We don't have to have a reference for it. And that's how we're going to be able to work with it in one scene, have the entire scene go away, have a new scene come up, and still be able to get to that data structure again. We'll just be able to ask it through its reference. And I've done this before within Unity, so I know that they do persist. Now I'll get specific on the data in a minute, but let's get an overview of the spawn system. And I think I'll bring up a little chart here so that we can talk about how this works. Well, I changed my mind. Let's hold off on that chart here for just a little bit. I think it'll make a little bit more sense when I talk a little bit more. We need to be able to handle a variety of mob types. Now, we've already seen the boss orcs and the elemental orcs and the regular orcs. That's just a proof of concept that we can have several different types of creatures. Now, they're sharing the same model, although you see I scaled one of them up. And I can probably go in and make changes to their materials and maybe tint things or something to give them a little bit different look. But it's quite okay to reuse models, especially if we label them so that they're unique. Okay, it's enough to say, oh, there's an orc over there, but I'm not sure what type of orc it is until we get close enough. But later on, we'll add additional mob types, and we're going to need to have data that keeps track of what's different between them. Next, where can they spawn in the world? That's going to be, okay, so we talked about what type of mobs there are. Where can they spawn? Now, I can't recall seeing a game where any mob could spawn anywhere in the world. And there are good reasons for restricting where mobs can spawn. We want to create zones where the difficulty kind of has certain progression between areas. So there'll be some areas that are going to be tougher and some areas where they're easier. And the idea is the player will find out where the easy areas are, where the areas they're comfortable with are. They'll work there until they progress up to the point where they can go into a tougher area. Okay. If we just start randomly putting stuff around the world, that's going to be kind of chaotic. Because we're not trying to kill off the players. As an aside, one of the things I enjoyed about the early days of EverQuest was the occasional higher level mob that would wander through an easy area. Now, what it did was it created a constant sense of danger. Keep your eyes open, watch out to see if something's going to happen, and you'd be okay. But the situation was definitely not something that was under control. So some examples would be, say, the vengeful skeletons in the Everfrost zone. Okay, these were 3 unique skeletons. They were level 9, 10, 11, and they would wander slowly through the starter area. So you might have some level 1 character doing their thing when one of these would run up and start pounding on them. Now, they're pretty tough, and they would kill you pretty quickly, but you could run away from them if you were fast enough, if you noticed them early enough. And you'd look at one of the ways you can notice by looking at their name. Out of the corner of your eye, you see a skeleton walking along. You think, oh, it's just another skeleton like the ones I've been killing. And you see it says, a vengeful soloist or something. And the thing comes after you. Well, you turn around and you run. So that was part of the game mechanic. And the skeleton would chase you relentlessly. And if you made it to an NPC guard, they would kill it. It rarely happened because other players were usually in the way. So what happened was an appeal for higher level players to kill off the skeleton. Now, similarly, there were the level 30 griffins that were wandered around through the common lands in areas where level 5 to 10 players would hunt. You'd have like one of them that would show up maybe once an hour or once every other hour. They weren't a constant thing. But I remember the screams of griffin as players ran through the zone lines to get out of there. So it just kept things interesting. Now, in general, when I say where things are going to spawn in the world, I just mentioned that we had certain areas that we wanted to set up based on difficulty. In general, we pre-select spawn points, these areas where they could occur. Each of these creatures are standing on its spawn point. Now, you can't see them because they're not visible in the game, but they are definite spots that have been marked out for these creatures. I decided to place empty game objects in the scene where the spawn points are. Each game object would consist of a transform, which has position and rotation information, and scale, but I didn't use scale in the spawn points. Placing them is really best done in a scene view rather than by a script. Okay, so let's take a brief look at that. And here's the scene view. What you can see in front of you are these teal icons that mark where the spawn points are. So we're in a particular work camp right here, and we have a number of different spawn points. These are just empty game objects that were created and given a name, and then I later added a script to them. And we'll talk more about that in a bit. So spawn points are collected together into what's called a spawn group. And a spawn group is it's a collection of spawn points, but it's more than that. It keeps track of what types of mobs can appear at these points, as well as how many of them can appear, and what the distribution is, what the probability of them is. So we're able to say within the spawn group, there are 3 types of orcs. They appear with this probability, and here are the points where they could appear. And then from that, we would be able to replace mobs as they get killed, respawn the entire area. So that's the point behind the spawn group, a collection of points and the entity records that tell us what types of orcs can appear where and with what frequency. And in the hierarchy, you can see how I've organized things just to keep things clear, because there could be a lot of spawn points out there. So there's an empty game object that's used as a folder, and it has 2 camps in it. Orc camp, the first one and the second one. So we're at Orc 1 right now. And there are 5 spawn points, of which we can see, there they are, there's the 5th one. So there are 5 of them scattered around here. Each one of them has its own location. And you can see their name matches what's shown up here. So you can instantly see which spawn points where. So that's the organization of the spawn points. And so it's really easy to create this in the scene view. Now I mentioned the spawn entry. And the spawn entry is where the spawn group learns about the different types of creatures. So that's how it knows that they're orcs. In this particular camp, we have 3 types of orcs defined. There are the regular orcs, which spawn 80% of the time. There's the elementals that spawn 15%, and then the boss spawns 5%. Whenever a spawn group needs to spawn a new mob, let's say I killed one and its respawn timer ran, it expired, it's time to replace it. The spawn group will randomly select one of the types along with one of the spawn points. Then the appropriate prefab is instantiated to transform a set from the spawn point, and we would see an orc appear in the world. Now, creating the spawn points is pretty easily. I created a prefab out of them, and we could drag them into the scene. If I wanted more exact placement, what I did is I took a orc prefab and drug it into the scene, placed it where I wanted them to be, and then I copied this transform. We can go over here to say, you can barely see copy component right here. Chopped off the video, I know. And what you do then is bring in or create a new spawn point prefab, and it'll appear probably off screen someplace. That's okay. You go to transform and say paste component values, and that spawn point will appear right where the orc was. And we can move the orc out of the way into the next place. So it's pretty quick to go and position where the orcs are and say, this is how I want it to look. And that is a good use of the editor for this type of work. Now, this is a script that we'll get to later, lists the spawn group. So I can change the spawn group for a particular point. All of these are set to spawn group 1. And if we go to orc 2, they'll all have spawn group 2. I have created an editor extension that we can see right here that will list the largest spawn group and tell me how many spawn points are there. So we'll be talking about Unity editor extensions in a little bit. But I find that very helpful, because when it comes time to create a new spawn group, I want to make sure I don't accidentally reuse one of the old numbers. So I'll find out, okay, largest one is 2, next one will be 3. I guess I don't need to know the number of spawn points, but I kind of wanted to know that anyway, so it was just a good use of a good illustration of the editor. Wow, half an hour in and we haven't written one line of code yet. But it's often important when we're working with complex systems to plan things out, and think about them, and talk about them a lot. And you'll maybe even do more of that talking than you do coding to make sure you have it right. Okay, the wrong thing to do is to jump in and start coding without having a good, solid plan. And I'm going to be asking each of you to create plans or designs for ideas that you have throughout the semester. That's going to be part of the written homework. And I want you to do that because it's going to force you to plan things out clearly on paper. And then you'll find, I think, that the implementation will go a lot better. Okay, now I mentioned a small script part that I created for the spawn points, part of the prefab. It consists of a spawn group ID, so we'll know which spawn point belongs to. And there's also a Boolean in the case of the points being used. And I prevented that Boolean from showing up here in the editor, in the inspector, because we don't need to have that. It doesn't have any use within the editor. This is going to be something that we can use at runtime to keep track of which spawn groups have been used. I decided to prevent the spawn system from reusing a spawn point until the mob that spawned there last has been killed. So if we spawn a mob at one particular spot, that spawn point is going to be marked off limits until that mob dies. Even if that mob wanders off, I don't want to risk having another mob get spawned there and have two of them sharing that spawn point. There are times when a mob may return back to its spawn point, and so I'm taking the easy way out, just saying one mob per spawn point. Now there are other spawn points. In this camp we have 5 spawn points, and I've limited this group to 3 mobs at a time. So we're going to pick 3 of the 5. So more of that on that later, but it explains why the Boolean was there. Now I could have implemented a free list and an in-use list. Here are the spawn points that are available, here are the ones that are used. That's a viable alternative. I'm just showing one quick and dirty way of doing it, just to get something working, and then we'll worry about making it perfect later. Now another reason for attaching this script is so that the spawn point group can locate all of its spawn points. Actually, I used another class to do this, that's Singleton, I'll talk about. But the idea is that on zone startup, it's going to grab all of the spawn point objects in the scene. And that's pretty quick, and it only needs to be done once. Each spawn point is then added to data structures based on the spawn group number. So we'll have that all arranged when the zone starts up. And those data structures persist across zone changes. They don't take up much space, and it saves us from if we go out of the zone and come back in later. Now having a list of spawn points means that we get to randomize spawning, which is good. An alternative is to use the use of the points would be to define rectangles, but there are many cases where a mob must spawn in a particular place. Consider a guard or a creature in its lair. Okay, so I'm not really interested in spawning in some general area right now. We could do that. We could find where the elevation of the terrain is and spawn it there, but that's another behavior, and you're welcome to explore that if you wish. The other thing we're seeing right now is a variety of mob types, even if some of them are rare. Okay, and especially if they're rare, that's going to keep things interesting. Now let's look at the spawn group in more detail. Let's talk about that. It needs to keep track of what spawn entries are in the group and what spawn points are. Recall the given spawn entry. A spawn entry is a mapping from a mob type to a spawn group with a probability of being selected. So we're saying that boss orc can be in this spawn group 5% of the time. It may be in another spawn group. That's okay. We can reuse the mob types, but a particular spawn point will only be in one spawn group. So we then have the spawn entry that sort of bridges the gap between those two. Now I want other behavior out of the group as well. I want to limit on the maximum number of mobs that can be in a scene, from that group, that is. So in this case here, I've said 3. I want 3 to be up. Now that doesn't mean they're always going to be up. If you come along and you kill them, they're going to start their respawn timers, and they won't be there until those timers expire. But we will never get more than 3. So that's one of the behaviors that spawn group will manage. And I plan to have the spawn group also manage what mobs are currently spawned. Indirectly, what spawn points are are they used? Well, those will be tracked in the spawn point itself. But we may need to despawn the entire group. You saw me earlier saying respawn, and it got rid of all of those creatures, brought in new ones. So the ability to go down the list and say, destroy, 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 and then bring in new ones requires that we keep references to all of them. So the spawn group is going to maintain that list there. So the group is going to need to be able to pick random spawn points that are not in use, decide on NPC type, check to see if we've exceeded the spawn group limit. And the other thing that we're going to do too is that there should be a limit there can be a limit per NPC type. So for example, the boss there, I've further restricted to say there will be at most one of those in the scene. I don't want to see multiple boss mobs here. Okay. Now the regular orcs, you can have as many of them as you want, but I don't want, I'm restricting the spawn system from spawning extraneous of this rare mobs. Okay, now my fancy slide here, just to kind of summarize what we saw. We have this zone manager. This is going to be the only mono behavior that we're going to have. It's going to be the only one that talks directly to Unity. There's going to be something I'm calling the NPC manager. This is going to be a persistent type with a singleton, which manages all of the NPCs. And it will be there across zones. Within a particular zone, we may have one or more spawn groups. As we saw, we have 2 of them. Each spawn group can have a number of spawn points and a number of spawn entries. So if we were to tell spawn group 1 to spawn a new mob, it would pick an entry to what type of the mob is it going to be, because that's a mapping between mob type and spawn group. So it'll say, give me a boss orc. And then it'll say, pick a spawn point. It'll find an unused spawn point and spawn the mob there. And we see the NPC appear there. So that's how all the stuff is going to work together, the hierarchy of the classes. And while I'm thinking about it, the NPC manager, one of its jobs is going to be to maintain the timers that we're not going to worry about in this video. But I need to talk about the spawn timers because that's part of the respawn behavior that we're trying to get. When a mob dies, a respawn timer will start. The length, duration of that timer will be based on the mob type. Okay, so a rare mob may respawn slower than a regular one. That doesn't mean we'll get another of that type, but that behavior is important when we consider certain rare types. Consider that we have, say, a dragon. We would have a spawn group just containing the dragon, a spawn point for the dragon, so that'd be the only spawn point, spawn entry to connect the two. And when it dies, we will set a very long respawn timer that may be several days. And so that will ensure that the dragons remain rare. And that's something we would do for a persistent world in an MMO. And we're not going to be doing something like that here, but we could. Okay, we just have to make sure that we saved off the timer values if we ever did game save. And if you did wait 3 days of real time and you came back, we could allow that dragon to respawn. Okay, so let's sum this up here. Why this complex of a system? It helps us to have rare spawns. Okay, there's nothing to keep us changing the chance type to the range of probabilities to be 1 in 1,000, 1 in 10,000. So we can make mobs as rare as we want to, or as common as we want to. And because when the zone changes, we calculate the total sum of the probabilities, or that's what we're going to do. And so we always just pick a number in that range and then decide what mob type to get. It gives us a variation in the mob types so that we're not always seeing the same mobs in the same places. And it helps us separate the mob type information from how it's used. So we can have orcs in other camps, in other zones. So that was a good separation of data. One of the objectives, and one of my objectives, is to never let the player know exactly what to expect. Some rough idea is okay. There will be orcs over there, but not how many are going to be up right now, or what type they're going to be. And I don't really want the boss mob to always spawn in the same location. I could fix that by creating that separate namespace, like I mentioned with the dragon, but I could also randomize it a bit by letting them pop around in many different places. Now, what if I don't want the boss to be up all the time? Okay, I can set him with a large respawn timer. EverQuest had random despawning. I don't think I'm going to implement that, but the idea is if the mob has been up for a certain amount of time, for an hour or so, if it's not been engaged, they'll despawn it and start the respawn timer. And so that makes the mobs rare. Okay, they're just not going to accumulate boss mobs all over the world. They'll disappear and you'll have to wait for it to respawn again. Now, you may say I've defined the worst element of the RPG, that's the grind. And it's true, but time sinks are part of the genre. The key is to always have something else to do. We can calculate the expected wait time for a rare mob from the information and adjust the parameters to decide how long we want somebody to wait before they expect to see the boss mob. If they insist on staying there for that amount of time, that's their choice. But there should always be other interesting things to do. Okay, so enough talk. Let's look into how to implement this. Let's start by creating a spawn point object. I'm going to go into scripts here and I'm going to create a folder so that I can keep spawn information together. And I will create a C# script for spawn point. And I'll add that in just a second. But first of all, I want to do is I want to create an empty game object. And I need to make sure it's off here at the top level. And I will worry about where it's at in just a second here. But first of all, what I want to do is take my orc. I'm using this orc as a kind of a stand-in so I can kind of see where he's going to be. I want him to be above ground and maybe over here in the corner. So I'm going to demonstrate this, and then I will have to copy the component, and then I will do a bunch later. And I want to do is I want to paste the component here, paste the component values, and we see that the spawn point appears. In fact, I think so what I will do now is I'll drag it down here, and that makes a prefab for me. So now I have a prefab. All right. So let's go through this again, and let me first of all create another empty game object, and I want to call this spawn points. I'm going to rename the spawn point so it isn't as confusing. Now, note the transform. Clear this transform out. Okay, I don't care where it is, but it needs to be 0, 0, 0. It's going to mess everything up. Now, underneath this, I'm going to create another empty game object, and I'll call it orc1, or maybe I should call it orccamp1. And I'll duplicate that and call this one orccamp2. This is orccamp2 where I'm at right now. I'll go back to orccamp1 in a little bit. I'll take the spawn point, drag it down here, and we see these right where he should be. That's good. So I'll rename this orc2 spawn point 1. It's important that I give it a name that, so that the object indicates what it is, where it is. That way, if I see something about orc2 spawn point 1 later on, I know where to come back and find it. The other thing is missing here, and I can go ahead and move my orc out of the way. Where are you, orc? In fact, I'm going to change his name to SB position so that he's very clear. Okay, so we can't see the spawn point anymore. Well, where is it? Well, it's right there. What I did last time was I came over to this little drop down and I selected an icon. And now we can see it as orc2 spawn point 1, which is really important. We can see it in game, so I can tell where that's going to be. Well, I mean, in the editor. It's not going to appear in game, but it will appear there. Okay, so let's do one more of these before I go and create some more. So let's see, I'll create this one right here. You put them in right in the middle. Okay, so I copy his component. This time I can just take and duplicate the prefab to spawn point 2, and I come back over here and say paste component values. And orc2 spawn point 2 is in position. Okay, let me create a few more spawn points and then I'll be back. And here we have my finished collection here. I've created 5 spawn points, which I think are good candidate positions. This is orc2, so I'm going to hop over to the other campsite here and find orc1. He is right over here. And you can remember this scene here where I was testing out this guy is, it's this orc1 here. I'm going to get rid of him. But first, before I do that, let me copy his transform, this component, bring SP position over here. Okay, I might want to. Oh. What just happened here? Where is orc? Orc1. Let's copy this and go back to my SP position. Oh, I don't see him because I didn't want to activate them. Alright, let me get rid of these 2 orcs, which we don't need anymore. I'll get rid of this marker thing, which I don't need. Oh, wait, I do need that. Wait a minute, that's the marker I'm using for my... No, those waypoints have their own markers. Okay, there's the back. Alright, so I'm going to go create some spawn points right here, and I'll be back. And here we have orc1 set up here with our, again, 5 spawn points. So I think we're in pretty good shape there. Now, the spawn points are missing something. I needed to create that script. Well, I did create the script, but I can attach it to them. So we first of all attach it to them, and then I will take this guy and apply the changes back to the prefab so that all of my spawn points now have that script. Then we can go in and edit the script. Alright, so this is the script. I'm going to get rid of all this stuff. I don't need that. I am going to make this mono behavior. I said earlier that this didn't need to be one, and I'd forgotten that spawn points need to be attached to game objects. This script does. So we're going to leave it as a mono behavior. I want to have a spawn group ID that's going to be visible, and then I want to have a Boolean in use, which I mentioned earlier. That's how I'm going to track to see which spawn points have a mob currently spawned. And I'll create a constructor, which is not something we normally do with mono behaviors. Alright, now the only problem I have with this, which is okay, but if I come back over here and I select my spawn point, let's check to see if I clear that out. Where's my... Oh, okay. Just took it a second. The editor to wake up here. It shows the in-use flag, and I don't really want that to be something we can edit. So I'm going to go back to my script, and what I want to do to get rid of that is that we can just tell the editor to hide the inspector. That little tag over there. And now, this should go away in a second or two. Yeah, okay, so it's gone. Alright, I'm going to now assign these spawn points to spawn point 1, which I should have done earlier. So I'm going to assign spawn point numbers here, and I'll go back over to work 2 and set those spawn groups as well. Okay, so now that I've done that, all these have been put together. I want to create a custom editor script for this because now I've gone ahead and created these spawn points without that benefit, but if I were creating a bunch of spawn points, I might accidentally reuse a spawn group. How can we avoid that? Well, let's create a folder. I'm going to name it editor. The name is important. Unity will look for any folder named any editor anywhere under assets and will incorporate those scripts. So I want to come down here and I want to create a custom editor for the spawn points. Create a script, and this will be called spawn point editor. Bring it up inside. Did I not double click that? Okay, so here's my spawn point editor. It is not going to be a mono behavior. This is going to be an editor. Now we say, what do we have? Editor doesn't know about that. Using Unity editor. I won't need these collections, and I'm not going to need any of this stuff either down here. I will want to identify as an editor though by saying custom editor, and then it's going to be editing things that are type spawn point. Okay, make sure the parentheses balance. Alright, so that tells me now that I'm creating a custom editor, and if I were to save that off right now and go back over here and click on my spawn points, I'm wondering if the spawn point will disappear from the inspector. Okay, that's, oh, no it isn't because I haven't overridden it. Let me just go back over there and do that now. Got a little ahead of myself. The spawn point, I mean, the editor works, all of the Unity editor is written using their immediate mode GUI as opposed to the retain mode, which is the new 4.6. So this is the way, old way. Now, I think I said before that both of the user interfaces still have their purpose, and the place for the old immediate mode GUI is in the editor. So when we're going to make editor extensions, we'll still make those here. What I want to do here is to override on inspector GUI. Okay. This function it's like on GUI, but it's called by the inspector. And the first thing I want to do is to draw the default inspector. I'm going to hold off doing that real quick. I'm going to save this. I'm going to go back out here, and you can see that the spawn point is no longer displaying. It just lists that there's a script, but there is nothing here to display. That's because the inspector is not being drawn. We'll fix that here. I wanted to kind of show the effect of all of this. So I'm going to call draw default inspector. And that will give us our inspector back that we had. And I guess that's our default behavior. And see, there we go. So that's what we saw before. Now I go to all that effort to do that because I want to do a couple more things here. What I want to do is I want to divide the number of spawn points, and I want to also find the largest group ID. So let me write a function first that does that. So you can see what I mean. Private void largest ID, something we're just going to call internally. And this is for the spawn group. But it also will count spawn points. So I can now I want to have a list of all the spawn points. So this will be an array of spawn points, and I say all spawn points. And that would be game object. Now, capital game object searches the entire scene. Okay, that's something we normally do a lot of. It here, I'm going to be doing it inside the editor, inside the inspector, which is a horrible idea. Except that, you know, it's handy to do. And if I find objects of type is what I want. If it's handy to do and it helps, then it's a good idea. But to mitigate that, because I really don't want to be counting them over and over every frame that this thing is running, I'm going to restrict it running to just like, say, once a second or so. That should be plenty. And that will give me enough responsiveness without really taxing the editor too much. So how do I go about doing that? Well, first of all, I might want to come up here and say, what time is it? Time equals, and let me cast this as an int. This time dot, and I want the real time since startup. Normally this is a float. Real time in seconds since the game started. Read only. Now I cast it as an int. I've truncated it. I've gotten rid of the fractional point part. What we're going to do is I'm going to want to check to see if it's changed since the last time. So this will give us a frequency of about once per second. And what I want to do here is I want to store when the last time it was called. Now if I say int last sample time, and I set it to 0, and we'll, this isn't quite right what I want to do, but I want to show you what the plan is. If I say if this is less than the last sample time, then I want to call largest ID. Now originally I had largest ID return that, but I'm kind of doing I think a couple of other things here. So let's bear with me on this. If I were to do this, this would not work because last sample time gets reinitialized every time through. What I want to do is make this static. Okay. That will now make sure that it persists across calls. It is a class variable. Maybe it would persist without that, but I'm going to be very sure here by making this last sample time. So now you would agree, I think, that this is being called once per second, because as a fractional second ticks over to the next integer, it will be 1 full second before that integer count will tick again. We'll keep getting multiple fractional updates until the next second crosses. You know, if we're running, say, I don't know, 100 frames per second or so, we're saving 100 calls. If that's too much, then we can just make it, we just change this expression to say, if it's greater than last sample time plus 1, that would make every 2 seconds. And we can dial it to whatever frequency we want. But the point is, though, as things are happening in the editor, I want this thing to go and count the group IDs. Okay, so I have a list of spawn points right now, and I want to say for each spawn point SP in all spawn points. In that list of spawn points I've got, iterate over all of them. And I want to say something like if SP dot, remember the spawn group is that field that we filled in the editor. If it's greater than the largest that I've seen so far, then I want to say largest equals sp.spawn group. And now I want to save that off. Well, how am I going to return it back here? Let me store another static up here. Static int. And this may not be best practice. I could probably I could probably be returning this and storing it up there, but I'm just going to stuff it up there right now anyway. In order to get up to that, though, since it is static, I can't just say last ID. No, actually I said I can't, but I'm going to be very clear and make it a class variable here. I want I think it's nice with statics to fully qualify them. My choice there. Okay, so now we are storing the largest up there. We don't have count yet, but that's okay. Now, if I, if I had the spawn, I could get the spawn point count down here very easily, and I should do it at the same time. Spawn point editor dot. Oh, I haven't created a spawn point count variable yet. Static int spawn point count equals 0. That's my count. And then if I say dot spawn point count equals, and so now that I pulled out all the spawn points, I can say all spawn points got lengths. That's why I chose to do it in here. So originally it was going to return the largest ID, but now it's got two values that's coming out of it, largest ID and the length. So what am I going to do with that? I need to somehow display that in the editor. Oh, one thing I forgot to do up here, I checked the last sample time, I never updated it. That's a bug waiting to happen. Equals int, again I'm truncating it, time.realtime since startup. Now technically this value here and this value here aren't the same, so maybe I should have stored it as, maybe I should write this as current, because that might produce some odd behaviors. I have to think about it, see if it's going to be a problem, but certainly there's no problem doing what I just did. Okay, so that will cause the frequency once per second sampling, and it will calculate those values which we're not displaying yet. So what we need to do is just to display a couple things. So I'm going to use the GUI layout, and I'll create a horizontal, I said GUI layer, I'm saying GUI layout dot begin horizontal. I was wondering why it wasn't auto-completing. It's usually a sign something went wrong. And we need to make sure that we do a GUI layout dot end horizontal here too. Those match up. And that'll break the editor. So I'll kind of do both of those at once. In fact, I'm going to do a pair of these because I have two values I want to display. And I will start with this one right here. I want to editor GUI layout prefix label. The prefix label is the string that comes before the value. So if I were to look over here, this word spawn group is a prefix label, and then there's the value. So prefix label spawn points. Okay, that will be the label, and then editor GUI layout dot. I'm going to create a label field. Now label fields are read-only things. They're just text. So I want to have the spawn point count, and I'll say toString. And if I come down here and I say editor GUI layout dot prefix label largest spawn group ID. This is a bit long, so it's probably going to get chopped off in most people's layouts. Editor GUI layout dot label field again, last ID dot toString. All those things balance. So that should be enough for us to get behavior. And if I come back over here and hope for the best, I'm going to check to see. Oh, okay, I have an error down here. Cannot create spawn point to spawn point. I have used spawn point in lowercase here someplace. So let me find where that is. Actually, it told me where it was. It's on line 41. Here's line 41. Did I call it? It is a type spawn point capital P. This is type spawn point capital P. right? So let me take a little look at that. Oh, I'm glad I did this. I did, because this is something I've done a few times, and I'm sure all of you have done it once or twice and will do it. There, find objects singular and find objects plural. Okay, if I ask for an array of objects, I expect to have more than one spawn point. If I just ask for singular, it'll give me the very first one, if that thing go away. So that should take care of that, hopefully. And okay, let's see if the editor wakes up. There we go. Now it's counted the spawn points. It says there are 10 of them, and the largest is 2. So the convenience of that for me, at least when I'm putting spawn points in the scene, outweighs whatever performance problems I might have. I mean, the editor is snappy enough right now. My once a second counting things isn't too bad. But again, if that does bog down, feel free to change that to 3 or 4 seconds or something like that. It'll be so infrequently we won't notice it. But there aren't that many objects in the scene to count. So it's a pretty handy little thing. So this is an editor. That is the spawn point editor completed. And before I get carried away, we're kind of at a good stopping point here. So I'm going to stop in this video, and then we'll pick up next time. We'll start working on the manager objects, and then we'll get all of the cool stuff put in for the spawning.